wasn't for this watch, it would be one of those unsolved mysteries.
It had a fairly, benign beginning, I guess, but it had an extremely tragic ending. It's difficult to make sense of this site because it is just a rail line. And for the average tourist who drives by on the highway, they would never recognize the significance of this. There's no buildings, there's no interpretation. It's basically just a spot that's in the hearts of local historians. On August the 2nd, 1920, right here happened one of the most dramatic incidents in Alberta history. The three Russians who robbed the train at Sentinel were George Arkoff, Tom Bassoff, and Osby Oloff. Just past Coleman, they decided to rob the train. They were armed, so it was definitely premeditated. We believe that they were hoping to find people with a lot of money on board, but it just wasn't to be. So the three robbers relieved the male passengers of their valuables, their money, a couple of pocket watches, including the pocket watch of Sam Jones, the train's conductor. When the train stopped here, the three bandits got off and disappeared into the bush. A manhunt ensued because train robberies are a pretty big deal.
When the call came in, all sorts of authorities were alerted. CPR had their own police force. They came onto site. The Alberta Provincial Police, of course, was there from Coleman, Blairmore, and Bellevue. And the RCMP was still in the area as well.
Despite a massive manhunt for them, none of them were found right away. One of them, Alex Oloff, he headed into the United States right away, whereas the other two remained in Crow's Nest Pass for the next 5 days. On August the 7th, 1920, two of the bank robbers came into the town of Bellevue. Someone spotted them walking down the street and entering the Bellevue Cafe here, where they went in to have lunch. The police were informed. Corporal Usher of the RCMP was to cover the back entrance, while the two Alberta Provincial Police officers, who were in plain clothes rather than uniforms, entered the front door with guns drawn. One of the robbers reached for his own pistol, and one of the policemen commenced firing at him at point-blank range. The second policeman attempted to fire his gun, but the second Russian bank robber grabbed his hand and pushed it down to the ground as a defensive move. And most of the bullets went in the floor, except for one that went into Tom Bassoff's leg. The policeman withdrew out the front door, where one of them, as he turned to exit, was shot in the side and fell to the ground. The second policeman, backing out the door, actually tripped over him and fell on the sidewalk and was briefly stunned. At that point, the two robbers exited the building, one of whom shot Corporal Bailey in the head at point-blank range. And the second robber staggered down the street and died from his wounds. Tom Bassoff eluded capture for several days. He hid out in the Frank Slide overnight. Bassoff gradually made his way from Crow's Nest Pass all the way to Pincher Station with his wounded leg, where he was finally spotted and apprehended by CPR detectives. Bassoff stood trial for the murder of one of the police officers and was convicted and was hanged.
We're outside the Alberta Provincial Police Barracks of Coleman that is now housing our exhibit on the watch that caught a train robber. And this is really one of the only artifacts tied to this entire story of the Sentinel train robbery, the Bellevue shootout, and that saga that took place over 2 weeks in the Crow's Nest Pass. That Alex Oloff would have got away with it, the train robbery, had he not tried to pawn this watch. Over a 3-year period, the Alberta Provincial Police, they were seeking any information, kind of randomly searching for Oloff as best they could, put a reward out for any information, and then just by happenstance, a pawn shop in Portland, Oregon contacted the Alberta Provincial Police and said that they had the watch. And so a constable was sent down, retrieved the watch, and then followed up the leads and actually hunted Alex Oloff all the way to Butte, Montana, where he was arrested without incident and brought back to Alberta and stood trial for his crimes. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison as part of the part he played in the train robbery, and unfortunately he died of sickness while he was incarcerated in prison.
It's a very important story, but it's one that's not really well known and not really well understood by the average Albertan. This 100th anniversary gives us an opportunity to kind of refresh our own memories on this very important event, very serious event, very famous event for its time.